Hello everyone, this is Sir NJ Javier and welcome to Creative Writing 101. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to thank first Mr. Godwin Bahoy for lending us his creatively designed PowerPoint presentation template inspired by Startup. If you want to follow Mr. Bahoy, you can follow him on his Facebook page and on his YouTube account. Once again, thank you Mr. Godwin Bahoy. For today's session, our focus is on poetry, its elements, and the techniques and literary devices usually used in making one. Let's begin by understanding what poetry is. Poetry is considered to be the counterpart of prose in terms of three S's. The first S means structure. Obviously, poetry is different from prose because of its structure. Poetry is made of lines and stanzas, unlike in prose, which is made of paragraphs and sentences. The second S means sense. When we write prose, we tend to write what we want to say directly or straightforward. Unlike in poetry, we tend to use a more colorful language, making our writings deeper in sense. And finally, the third S means sound. Poetry is obviously different from prose in terms of sound, thanks to its rhyme, rhythm, and meter. Now we understand why poetry is considered to be the counterpart of prose. One more thing you need to remember about poetry is that it is usually intended to express emotions. Although there are poetries made to tell stories, most poetries are made to express the writer's emotions. At this point, let's talk about the elements of poetry, beginning with the most basic one, that is line. As we have said a while ago, line is considered to be the counterpart of sentences in prose. And remember, lines may or may not have an exact amount or number of syllables depending on the type of poem you're writing. Next is stanza. Stanza is considered to be the counterpart of paragraphs in prose. Simply, it is a group of lines and there are different kinds of stanzas depending on the number of lines that compose it. Again, the types of stanzas are based on the number of lines that compose them. These are the following. A couplet is composed of 2 lines. On the other hand, a tercet is composed of 3 lines. There is also the terza rima, which is composed of 3 stanzas of 3 lines each. Then, quatrain from quattro means 4 lines, sestet with 6 lines, and octet with 8 lines. But with the evolution of poetry, there are poems or stanzas with 5 lines called as cinquain and 7 lines which is called as septet. The third element is meter. It is simply the measurement of the poem. There are 2 ways to identify the meter of a poem. The first one is by looking at the arrangement and number of syllables per line. The second is by looking at the arrangement and number of stressed and unstressed syllables in each line. Let us discuss them further. Again, there are 2 ways to identify the meter of a poem. The first way is through this. Let's look at the poem written by Miss Micah Jill de Guzman titled My Dim Heart. This is an example of a haiku, meaning it is composed of 3 lines. The poem goes, silent tears of pain, the Lord enters my dim heart, renewed strength and faith. To identify the meter of this poem, we simply count the number of syllables. And we see this, that for the first line, there are a total of 5 syllables. For the second line, 7 syllables. And the last line, 5 syllables. So our meter for this poem is 575. The second way to identify the meter is by looking at the number of stressed and unstressed syllables per line. There are different kinds of this meter. The first type is called accentual meter. In here, each line has a fixed number of stresses but varies in the total number of syllables. The second one is the syllabic meter, meaning each line has a fixed number of syllables but varies in the total number of stresses. The third type is a combination of the 2, which is the accentual syllabic meter, meaning each line has the same number of stressed and non-stressed syllables in a fixed order, meaning there are fixed number of stresses and fixed number of syllables. And finally, we have the free verse, which means that the lines have irregular patterns of stresses and syllables. Of course, the free verse is the easiest one to make. The fourth element is one of the most unique features of poetry, and that is rhyme. Rhyme pertains to the likeness of sounds in poetry. Remember, if a poem has no rhyme, then it's called a blank verse. There are different types of rhymes, based on position, based on the number of syllables, and based on the likeness of sounds. Let us discuss them further. The first two types of rhyme we will be discussing are based on position. The first type is the end rhyme. From the word end, this is the most common type of rhyme which can be found at the end of the lines. There's also the rhyme positioned in the middle and in the end of each line. This is what we call the internal or leonine rhyme, the rhyme which can be found in between two or more words in a single line. The next types of rhyme pertain to rhymes based on the number of syllables. We have the masculine rhyme, which means the rhyme consisting of a single stressed syllable as in car and far, and the feminine rhyme, which means the rhyme consisting of a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable as in mother and father. The last set of rhymes are based on the likeness of sound. We have the perfect rhyme, meaning the exact match of sounds in a rhyme as in ask and task, and we have the slant rhyme or the imperfect rhyme, also called as the oblique rhyme or off rhyme, wherein the sounds are similar but not exactly the same, as in port and heart. The fifth element is rhythm. This is related to the rhymes of the poem because it pertains to the succession and alternation of the similar sounds within the poetry. And to identify the rhythm, we go to the sixth element, and that is the rhyme scheme. Also called as rhythmic pattern, rhyme scheme simply pertains to the rhythm of the poem, and this is done by assigning letters to each set of rhymes within the poem. Look at this example. Again, the rhyme scheme pertains to the rhythm of the poem, and we identify it by assigning letters to each set of rhymes within the poem. Let's look at this example. We have here the poem written by William Wordsworth titled I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. We will be looking at the first stanzas of this poem and identify the rhyme scheme. We have the first stanza as a sestet, meaning with 6 lines. Let's look at the rhymes here. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Cloud is the last word of the first line. Automatically, we will be labeling the first sound as A. Let's look at the second line, that floats on high over vales and hills. Let's compare the last sound or the last word, hills, over cloud. Are they rhyming? No. So since they are not rhyming, we will be labeling hills with another letter, that is B. On the third line, we have when all at once I saw a crowd. Let's compare the word crowd with the first and the second line. Crowd, is it rhyming with hills? No, so it cannot be labeled as B. But is crowd rhyming with cloud of the first line? Yes, crowd and cloud are rhyming words. Therefore, we will label it as the same as the first line, A. Then let's go to the fourth line, daffodils. Is daffodils rhyming with crowd of the third line? No, so we cannot label it A because it's not rhyming with crowd and cloud. What about hills of the second line? Daffodils, hills. Yes, it is rhyming, therefore we will label it as B. Let's look at the last word of the fifth line, trees. Is trees rhyming with the fourth, which is daffodils? No. What about with crowd of the third? Trees, crowd? No. So since it's not rhyming with the first and the second rhyme, we will be labeling it as a new one, which is C. And then for the sixth line, breeze. Is breeze rhyming with trees? Yes. So we'll be labeling it the same as C. You may be thinking, trees and breeze, although they are rhyming, are slightly not alike. It's because it's an example of a slant rhyme. Once again, this is how we identify the rhyme scheme of a poem. The seventh element is tone. Just like any other literary type, poetry also has a tone. Tone is the overall impression a poetry makes towards its readers. It's simply the emotion the writer is conveying through the poetry. And it is highly affected by the writer's choice of words, or as what we have discussed, diction. Most common examples of tone or emotions conveyed by poetry are being in love, being inspired, being grateful, being so mad or angry, and more. Our eighth element is theme. Just like tone, theme is a basic element of any literary type. Theme simply means the main idea or the general topic of a piece of writing. And in terms of poetry, the most common themes are love, family, revenge, inspiration, overcoming fears, and more. And finally, we go to the ninth element, that is lesson. Every poetry has a lesson the writer is trying to convey. It is simply the moral or the value that is inculcated in the words of a poetry. Once again, these are the 9 elements of poetry. Aside from these elements, there are also literary techniques and devices that are usually used when writing poetry. But all of these literary techniques and devices were already discussed during our first episode. To recall, these are diction, imagery, and figures of speech. To briefly recall, diction pertains to the writer's choice of words. On the other hand, imagery is the use of descriptive language to paint a picture in the mind of the readers by appealing to the 5 senses. And the figures of speech are expressions or statements that deviate from literal meaning to add color to our language. And that's it for our lesson for this session. Thank you very much for staying with me until the end of this video. Once again, please make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell for you to be updated for our next episodes. Once again, this is Sir NJ Javier, and this is Creative Writing 101.